Okay, so now that we've lost time, I'm going to reintroduce John Andrews here. Thank you so much for joining us, John. I greatly appreciate the time. We're going to be going through the credit union board practices. There's so much information that this is actually going to be a two-part process, so please stay on the tune for that as well.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. With us in the studio today, we have Hillary Miley, who heads our research group.
So we'll be talking about our 2021 board survey results. We sent this survey out in the second half of last year, and we distributed it to all credit unions with assets of 100 million or more. We sent it to CEOs and board chairs of those credit unions. So we gave a few weeks for people to respond, and we got responses from 685 credit unions, which is an overall response rate of 38%. And 67% of those responses were from CEOs and 33% were from chairpersons. So that is our methodology for the survey.
Okay. And what's interesting, we've been doing this since 2014, and we've tried to do it every other year just to see for trends and shifts in attitudes and beliefs. So what's interesting today, you're going to see two types of data. One, you're going to see credit union industry when we think that's an overall generalized trend we need to speak about. And then the second way you'll see it is by asset band. And you'll see, it gives us a chance to compare and contrast. But I can't stress enough, you guys, thanks for participating in these activities so we can, share that and try to make it as real time as possible. So I'm going to start the survey. And remember, this is overall industry as we start. Our first slide we wanted to talk about is what type of education levels we're seeing on the board. And, if you go back when credit unions started, boards totally represented the field of membership. And as we become more community chartered and more diverse in the areas we serve, we've seen this change as well. So right now, if you look at bachelor's degrees and above, that's predominantly who serves on our board of directors as we go forward. So it's not necessarily good or bad. It just seems as we become more complex as an industry and regulators ask us to do more, we've seen, the experience levels move up as well. When we look at backgrounds, we look at finance and accounting, still by far the strongest skill set or competency that we look at. And as credit unions grow and diversify, we're starting to see other things pop up. Hillary, is there anyone that you saw grew, over the last survey or the last few surveys? I mean, finance has always been the top.
Yeah, that continues to be the top. We are seeing boards look for more experience in areas like technology, human resources, legal, just because I think, since we have had the predominant skill be finance, accounting backgrounds, and especially also with those seg-based credit unions, being related to the industry in which the credit union was founded. But boards are looking for a little more diversified experience. So those are a lot of the areas that we see people targeting when they're doing board recruiting.
Yeah, when you look at, director's job, one of the core jobs is to mitigate risk. And, the cliche is, what do you lose sleep over? And it is obviously safety, security, compliance type things. And that's why that's going to emerge. And as we look at succession planning and board recruitment, those are the things that seem to come to the top as things that would round out the collective expertise of a board. This should be no shock because I think it confirms what's out there. The predominant category, prominent categories. Help me, Jeff.
Prominent. I like it. It's a dollar word.
Okay. But we do skew older. And our challenge always when we come to strategic planning is we have a collective age experience on a board of X, and we're trying to make decisions for members that are in all demographic segments. And we see that 11% for the folks under 44. We expect that to rise and hope it rises. So we have just a nice balanced approach to how we address credit union issues. The male-female mix, 72% men, 28% female, if we'll call it that, hasn't changed. I think 2014, you've seen that, right, Hillary?
Nope, no change. It's great.
Yeah. And again, in recruiting efforts, the idea of that's something that we're challenged with. It continues to be area that we can improve upon. when we look at the question, and I always ask this when I do facilitation and planning meetings, is, hey, does the board, simple, we're going to make decisions today that are going to impact a lot of families and households and communities. Do we represent who we're supposed to serve? And the answer, if you look at since 16, we're kind of in the middle. There's not a lot of, confidence that we for sure do this. And again, when we come back to succession planning, the idea is how can we feel real good that we represent the demographics of our community.
So, John, what are some of the downsides of not having that representative of the community? Do you see something that immediately comes to mind?
Well, I mean, okay, you go back to the 80s. I've literally been in board meetings where some would say, we need to stop promoting car loans because you should save and just pay cash for your car. And, how's that working out for you?
Mm-hmm.
So we're projecting what somebody should do with their finances as opposed to being empathetic of what they're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more diversity we have on a board, obviously we're going to have more perspectives on that. And it's real powerful when somebody has been in a position on the board and says, I've been through that same struggle. I've been through that same challenge. And this is why our program doesn't work.
Yeah.
Or why our product doesn't make sense for this particular segment of our membership.
Yeah,
those are the key things.
Because your background, if everything is telling you, hey, this should work, but it's not going to work in this particular area, it's not the greatest of ideas.
Absolutely. So when we look at age limits, okay, so the debate is, maybe people are staying longer than we'd like to do, overstaying a welcome. So start to look about, well, how do we, what's the word? We try to structure who's in and who's out, so to speak. So one of the ideas, okay, let's have mandatory age limits. Well, if 80 is the new 70 and 70 is the new 60, and I hate putting an age limit. That's I can't generalize that there's an age where you couldn't make a contribution. And you see, since 2016, it's been relatively small group of folks that have mandatory age limits when it comes out of an election time. And then when we look at tenures, the blessing and the curse, right? So 10 years of experience, they've weathered different economic cycles. They've made decisions in different rate environments. They've seen credit unions grow. They've done mergers, and that's valuable. But then we're going to turn over, just like we're doing with credit union executives. There's going to be a time where, we're going to have the tipping point where it's going to skew younger, but still we're going to be, I'll say 9 to 12, 9 to 15 is kind of the sweet spot right now of length of tenure. And that's going to continue for a while.
Yeah, and that's something that we don't see a relationship with size of the credit union across all asset bands. That one's pretty similar.
Yeah. The dynamics of a board, and that's why we're presenting a lot of this data in cumulative form, because there is not a lot of distinction between, asset bands are different things. So that's interesting. But you go back to 2014, it was 63.7, it's 58. So it's slightly gone, but that's not a statistical move over, that amount of years.
No.
I had a good question from a good discussion this morning about this, and as credit unions have, we've been on this merger train for a while that we're getting larger credit unions. So the kind of that middle market is what's kind of dropping out. So we still have a lot of small credit unions, a lot of big credit unions, and in the middle where we're dropping out, I think that's where we might see the needle move, but it hasn't happened yet on tenure. A question again on just how we put it together. How many CEOs are actually board members or have seats on their board? It's about 10% of credit unions right now, but you go back to 2016, we're at 10% as well. So that hasn't moved. I can tell you moving forward, best practices and good governance say that number will probably come down lower as we try to get more people in the community to be involved. So we can have that good distinction between what's ours, what's yours, what's management, and what is board responsibilities. So a question, kind of a holy grail question, what's the perfect size board? And there is no question. So no perfect.
It's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. There's no answer.
So, if you didn't do a survey and you did a prediction, you would say 9 was the number, and that's predominantly what we continue to see. In now, this is about in the $1 billion space, and that would track with the other groups as well. 13, 15, and 17. That's kind of obviously it's a reducing trend, and the reason being is you go back 30 and 40 years, a lot of single sponsored credit unions, they had a formula. You got one person in marketing, one person on the line, one person in HR. They all had a representative on the board, and we had a typically higher number. And we've kind of settled on 9 for a number of years. How now with 7 being the most or the second most frequent scope. My challenge, personal challenge with 5 and 7 is change of control.
Mm-hmm.
It only takes 1 or 2 people to get sick or move or retire, and then we'd have a new influx of board members, and that rise creates a few problems. One is a CEO likes consistency, likes direction, and if we shake it up, there might be a concern there. And then also culturally, you've built this place for 50 or 70 years. You've got a pulse of what it takes to be successful in the community as we bring new people in, and they don't have the benefit of education and just the oral traditions of how we do things. It can change the makeup of a credit union pretty quickly. So not arguing that, less is more. It's just a challenge is why succession planning is so important, to have people to fill those chairs that know the culture, know the consistency of how we want to do things in the community. Now, I love this chart. It says, like, based on the number of board members we have, is it like 3 little bears, I guess? Too many, too little, or just the right amount? And you can see correlation is no matter what you pick, people think that's just the right amount for them.
Mm-hmm. Which strange how that works. It fits.
I love when stats, show you what we know, kind of thing. But you can see as it skews lower, there is a little bit more concern that we do need more folks. Now, I'm going to kind of turn step 1 was like, what do boards look like? Step 2 is what are some of the practices that we're seeing out there, and not necessarily best practice, but more predominant practices. So the idea of consent agendas is on the rise, slowly. And, the idea is a lot of governance models, just say, aha, I caught you. You're not doing things well because your board meeting is 3 hours long. Well, there's perfect times when we need 3 hours. But there have been some people that come through the industry and say, let's use consent agenda, just get rid of all the practical stuff that the regulators make us to do, on the to-do list, get rid of those and really focus on strategic plan. That's great. And then I'll go to the GAC meeting and I'll say, how are the board meetings going? We did the last one in 37 minutes. So almost like a NASCAR pit stop. That's not the goal. And so we can see it's on the rise. We'll continue to see getting rid of the mandated stuff that we may have to check the box that we did, and spending more time on strategic and the future is a way we want to look at that. The next thing, and we look at high-performing credit unions. High-performing credit unions question everything, they measure everything, and they have a constant drive or strive to find out as much data as possible to make decisions. So one of the things that a high-performing board does is they evaluate themselves. And the idea is, let's see what's working, not working. Let's change this. Don't wait 3 years or 5 years before it breaks, before we fix things. Let's don't have regulators tell us what to do. Instead of, we manifest our own destiny. So when you look at that chart on the screen here, when it comes to evaluations, you see that 36% of credit union boards evaluate themselves once a year. But what's the next highest category? Never. And again, not good or bad. And usually there's a correlation. The longer a board's been together, you classically say, we know each other. We don't need to evaluate. Everything's going fine, until it's not. So a best practice is always striving to, there's something that we can tweak or make better and enhance. So why not look at that? And what's interesting is when it gets to, okay, we do it once a year, we do it twice a year, no set schedule. Is it formal, informal? And so informal is the most predominant response here. So when I look at the data, my challenge is, okay, you say you do it once a year, but was that a slap on the back saying, hey, good job, Jeff, you're awesome? Or is it really actually an instrument or a document? And we obviously subscribe to it should be a structured exercise, looking at competencies, look at contribution, look at engagement. And it just ramps up the idea that you have accountability to your fellow directors. Not one or two people are having to do the heavy lifting, that we all work together. So that's something that we're going to be tracking in the next few years is like, can we make sure that we have more formal processes? When you get into the compensation discussion, when we're looking at, are we going to be, paying volunteers to participate and contribute to our organization, we want to make sure we have those tools in place. Okay. And it's just the best practice. And the next slide here talks about, well, what are they using for criteria? And as an industry, we got to move further than you just showing up.
Yeah.
And now it's important because I work with so many credit unions that, throughout the years, you're sweating a quorum, right? We can't make a decision. We need a decision made and we can't get people there. We can't vote and on and on. I understand that. But the high performing credit unions are going, that's not negotiable. You're going to show up, and show up today is so much more flexible, right? We're Zooming, we're online, we're on the phone. We don't have to be there in person in a lot of cases. So those are good things. So we look at attendance being the highest rated criteria today, but in 5 years, I would expect that to be lower on the list. And then idea that you're going to roll as you're going to do the things that you have in the job description that you've committed to do. You're communicating, you're doing your training. These are the things that are going to make high-performing credit unions stand out in their communities. What we see as kind of a bullet, going to the top of the chart is the diversity and the governance model. And as we talk more and more about that, I think what people do, what's checked, and people do what we're talking about, and we expect that to be a higher rated item as we move forward.
Yeah, definitely top of mind kind of thing. And we need to distribute that through from the board all the way down.
And just to put you on the spot, Hillary, you go back to 2016, was diversity even on there?
I'd have to look. Let me see.
So yeah, put her on the spot. Shouldn't do that.
You don't keep all the years of all this data in your head and ready at all times.
No, that's your job.
No, we.
Oh, sorry.
This is a newer question in the last two surveys.
That's my point. Is back then, it wasn't on the radar, which it should have been.
Right, and I mean that's why it wasn't even included in the survey. Is is this something we should be measuring? And the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you. I agree. So our next slide, we talk about. If I move it here, how are committees configured? Jeff, are you pro committee or anti committee?
I feel like this is a trick question and it's a trap.
Totally. I'm still waiting.
I'm going to go a pro committee.
Yeah, there you go.
I like a pro committee.
Now, there's things that we all have to have, obviously, and then there's things that we have on an ad hoc basis. But we just wanted to say, like, what's emerging, and exec committees have definitely, configuring a smaller group of officers to deal with specific things is growing, as well as asset liability management growing. That's mandated by regulatory issue, and we're tracking that. The one that we're dealing with, which is the most interesting to me, is the exec comp committee. We're talking about a compensation environment where there are significant salaries out there. The optics of how we pay, what we pay, when we pay executives is on the forefront of a lot of people's minds. And we're seeing boards craft committees to be specialists and in that arena to help contribute to the full board's decisions to keep the best and the brightest. So we expect that to continue to grow. And then what's interesting about HR comp committee, that's kind of flat. When you see 16, it was 18% and it's 21% in our last survey. So what's happening there is as credit unions get bigger and more sophisticated HR functions, we're hiring higher caliber HR folks to run that. And in theory, CEO, you take care of folks and let us take care of you. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be a good, what I see in high performers, kind of best practices, so to speak. Technology is a tough one to look at, simply because, if you're a volunteer and you're 65 years old and your degree was in technology, that degree,
how modern or relevant of all that.
How relevant it is. And most folks that have been in that profession, that every 6 months we reinvent things, and they've kept up. So the idea that that's where you see a lot of third party expertise coming, and a lot of boards simply will have volunteers work on committees, whether it's we don't have it on there, right? No, but like facilities, yeah, right. I went to the top. Where's facilities?
Yeah.
Oh, I should have gone one
Not
down.
there.
Right? So close. Those are issue specific or project specific things that you can put or cobble people together when you need them, but not necessarily standing committees. On board meeting length, the idea where do we stand in 1 to 2 hours is the list, and less than an hour. Again, I don't put a value judgment if this is good or bad, but just the idea is if you're in the 2 to 4 hour range, the question is why. Where are we spending our time? Is it the best use of time? Can we use the consent agenda? Could we use committees to do some of the heavy lifting? So when we get to the board, we're ready to make decisions. So there's some ideas there, but it looks like, that 1 to 2 hours is where we're settling on. And if I come visit you, I love it when we eat.
Yeah.
So
not as long as it's not Thanksgiving dinner like 5 or 6 times. Is that the
right? Yeah. So in 2019, I did 42 business trips. Last year I did 4, but I didn't lose any weight. So I don't understand why that happened. I guess, I need to go to those board meetings where they don't feed you. Obviously.
So John, on the committees piece, we have a question of, are you seeing the emergence of cyber committees or credit unions combining with that with technology?
Yeah, that's where we're seeing it mostly. It's becoming a subset of the technology issue. And, your job as a board is to mitigate risk. And cyber, is that where you lose most of your sleep? A lot of sleep is not slept on that. And I don't think we're expanding the role beyond the intent of the committee, but I think it's a nice place to put it. Usually the competencies of the volunteers make sense there. And so cyber threat, to have a separate committee on cyber and a separate committee on technology, I think we're going to have overlap and a little bit of bumping into each other on what vendors you're using, why you're using them, how you're approaching an issue, and maybe some confusion, quite frankly, to staff of who am I supposed to be listening to? But it definitely integrated.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, because there's a lot of overlap in those two skill sets, your information security, your cybersecurity, your IT side. All those pieces kind of blur together. So having a committee that can talk towards all of that, but independently, I think you're starting to have a little bit too much committee.
Well, and again, in the spirit of volunteer, if you do kind of our collective competency assessment and we're weak or shallow in that area, or we have an absence of, that's kind of your blueprint for what you'd like to bring on the board, or use third-party volunteers, to fulfill it. Just don't think every director has to fill these committees.
So one other question on that slide there, John. Can we go, is it back one slide, I think? Yep. Hillary, quick question on the credit committee. There's no history shown. Can you give us a little illustration or talk a little bit about the credit committee there?
Yeah, so we didn't include that as an answer choice in 2016 and 2018. And the reason we added it is because we obviously give the other option, and that was one of the write-ins that was most frequent. So every year we check that. And if we're getting a trend, then we add it as an actual answer choice.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So again, this morning having a discussion with one of our clients about, okay, I'm recruiting a new volunteer, a prospect. And one of the questions they're going to ask is, well, how much time is required? And what's interesting about this is, okay, over time, what are people estimating they spend? So in 21, if we look at the orange bars, 1 to 3 hours is what we're seeing was the self-reported. Now, I think chairmen probably spend more time. I think you spend more money on more time on committees if you're on multiple committees in that. I'm probably in the 4 to 6 hour is what if we didn't do a survey and projecting what it would take to feel good, and that's a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question. But again, this is what we're seeing as self-reported data. Now, when we go 10 plus hours, I always suggest let's take a step back and say, are we doing staff work? Are we doing operational things? Are we helping out in some other areas? And, I don't think that's fair to an to a volunteer to ask them to spend that amount of time. Now, if you're in the middle of a CEO search or a merger, yeah, there's going to be periods where we're going to put some decent hours in. But again, I'd love to hear from the audience if they want to kind of type in what they're seeing. Does that look what you're seeing, or do you think it skews a little higher than these numbers? We'll look at that at the end.
And this is something that does vary by asset group. You typically see larger credit unions report that they spend more hours on board duties than smaller credit unions.
Okay, so like in the $1 billion space, are we seeing more 6 to 10s probably?
Yeah, so among $1 billion credit unions, 68% say 1 to 2 hours, 27% say 2 to 4. But then when you look at credit unions that are 100 million to 250, only 9% say they spend 2 to 4 hours, and then 74% spend 1 to 2.
Okay, thank you.
So the biggest range is between that lower sector and that higher sector.
Right, got it. So our next set is, once we've recruited somebody and they're committed time, the best practice is we have to do continuing ed, and regulatory bodies have kind of mandated this, but the best practice is, even if it wasn't mandated, we want all of our directors and volunteers to keep up with the game, so to speak. What's interesting is from 14 to 21, it's gone down, but that's collectively. And again, I think that's because we've lost some of the middle market asset size credit unions in the last few years. But when you look at the $1 billion space, it's 67%. So let's call it 7 out of 10 have a specific policy that goes above what's mandated to make sure you're doing continuing ed. And the blessing of COVID, if there was a blessing. Oh, by the way, my brother said that at my niece's wedding.
Oh, that's always a great place to bring that up.
He said COVID was bad, but there was a blessing. I go, really? Stop drinking.
Is people sneezing, saying God bless you? Is that the blessing?
Yeah.
Jeez.
But what happened is, think of the things that we did well during COVID. And one of them was, we safely moved people to home,
mobilized
home. We safely, kept people's access to their money, their funds, their borrowing needs, and we shifted technology. And from the board's perspective, working from home, doing Zooms and getting the technology in the hands of volunteers, we thrived. The boards did a great job. And I just, you want to recognize that as a thing that came out of it that shows us that we can do this, we can be flexible, and it worked out really well.
Which is wildly interesting, because it was an absolute no, that can't work, to holy cow, this worked really well. We were able to see what we can do here. That's fantastic.
Well, before your time, it was some credit unions were hesitant for people to telephone in.
Mm-hmm.
If physical presence was a requirement, or they could kick you off the board. So we've become much more realistic and accommodating to that. And then what type of education are we looking at? So we define community ed as, going through accreditation programs and training, formal training modules, going to conferences, going to schools at the national level, at the state level, and then having just internal documents. And as you can see, they're all used in a decent fashion. What's interesting is, when we go to the resources, we look at who's providing them. NCUA's website has a few. CUNA is kind of the go-to. NAFQ, and obviously CUES has materials too. But what we challenge people to do is to get out of the credit union space. These are awesome. So don't leave the webinar thinking we're saying anything about these sources. We need these, and they're very valuable. And, our industry needs this as a foundation. But I always encourage my folks to get outside of the credit union space to look at how other industries are doing things. So if you make the argument you're a retail business, not a financial services business, as, I send people to the National Retail Federation conference, Bank Administration Institute, how are the the gaps and the Victoria's Secrets of the world dealing with how they put a, store together. What's the layout? As we talk about, is the branch dead or is the branch the future of credit unions? It's nice to look at that. So when it comes to financial literacy, the idea of the cost of delivery channels and how do we look at that in the future, there's stuff outside of this. So I expect the other to grow, the other sources. And then Hillary's guys, you'll put it on the survey as different options next year.
Mm-hmm.
That's my prediction. When we look at kind of shifting to succession, which is kind of near and dear to my heart, we look at how many credit unions have formal succession plans in place, and you say we don't get out of the 40s, since 2014, and even when we look at the $1 billion space, it's 49.8%. If you've had an exam this year, you know that succession planning, staff, executive succession planning is on the hit list. And people are asking, regulators are asking to see documentation. And I say we need to take that a step further, and we need to look at board succession plans. And again, the correlation, the smaller the board, the more chance that there could be change of control. So that's why this is important to have it on your radar. So when you get into planning this year, I encourage you to put something on the agenda to say, how's board succession going, recruiting, retention, and see if we can make sure we're covering our bases in that area. When we look at how frequently it is reviewed, once a year is the most prominent, and then we go from there. So in 21, 35% of billion-dollar credit unions said they think their plan is extremely effective. So, it's that succession contingency. We don't need it every day, but when we need it. And that's what we're looking at there. So just some dynamics of how a board does the governance piece. Do we rotate chairs? And you can see there is some formula out there, whether it's 1, 2, or every 3 years, and then it's not no, right?
No.
Yeah, it's just they do something other than 1, 2, or 3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so at this point, let's call it 50% of chairs are rotated. And I go back to what I said earlier. Do we mandate this or do we encourage it? Because sometimes mandate, depending on the situation, could hurt you, not necessarily help you. So if this was a response to somebody not relinquishing control or not giving everybody an opportunity to contribute, that's one thing. But, you're doing a merger and the other side knows that you're rotating chairs or they're terming out or whatever, you might have a competitive disadvantage. So you always want to be able to say that you've got good continuity, leadership continuity among your board so you can address those situations. Do we rotate officers? Kind of the same concept. I think when you bring somebody on the board, you would hope they'd be capable of serving in this capacity at a certain time in their participation. So it's not all the burden on 1 or 2 or 3 people. And then this gets into kind of term limits. And you can see it's very, very shallow at this point. 9 out of 10 credit unions don't have it, but almost 40% of boards should say they should have term limits. So what's interesting is one of the concepts that I think kind of bridges or is a hybrid is, we don't have term limits per se, but we prefer you to stay, make a 3-year term commitment. So it's 9 years. And you think about at the ages of our volunteers, a 9 or 10 year commitment is, that's asking a lot, and that's pretty cool. And then also as we skew younger, to ask somebody to make, 15 and 20 years probably is not going to happen as frequently as we've seen it in the past. So the concept of if we don't want to do mandatory retirements, how do we get the pipeline going and how do we have kind of soft landings for folks that fall into that category that we still want to participate, but the term limits are up. So we look at credit unions that are using advisories or associates. It's almost 2 out of 10 right now. We expect that to continue to rise. The idea is that we want people to be on those kind of on the bench waiting. But it all depends how you set this up. So if I'm a high profile community leader and you tell me, oh, we want you on the board. Absolutely. I love your credit union. I want to be involved. Thank you. And then you go, but you're going to be an associate for 3 years and you can't vote, but you can come to all the meetings. But, there's going to be this distinction. A lot of, serious business people are going to say, no, thank you. I want to go to a place where I can make an impact today.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be careful of how we phrase that or frame that, because you can't keep them on the bench for too long. Almost the correlation, the higher the power, the more they contribute. And from our perspective, if they're good, I'd love to get them in there as soon as possible, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But you've seen this in mergers, and you've seen this in our strategic planning work that, when you look at the dialogue, sometimes an associate member is just profound. They get the community, they get, where we should go, and they have great advice, and then they don't get to vote.
Well, and as we're talking about, improving diversity, improving demographic representation in boards, if you're filling that on your associate advisory roles and they don't move in very quickly, then you're not really benefiting as much as you could.
I don't think it counts.
Right. Exactly.
Look at our diversity, and you got to include our associates. Well, no, that's you want to see the diversity in the formal chairs,
which is good, but you have to.
Yeah, it's a good
not
start.
Keep them on the bench forever.
But staying on the bench too long is a drag, and those contributors will get impatient, and then we'll lose some good folks that way. And so when we look at those, and I should have talked about the emeritus status too. Creating the value, the culture, the DNA of an organization, the ability to have that transition and sharing what's in their heads and what has been done in the past, so valuable. And I always encourage credit unions to look at that role. Okay. And then what are they allowed to do? So can they attend meetings? Yes. Can they do strategic planning? Yes. Can they attend conferences? You have no problem with that. These numbers these percentages probably should go higher in years, is because I want them, fully engaged as quickly as possible. Now we kind of shift gears, and we're talking about the recruiting. The holy grail of credit unions right now is, we want to do succession planning. Yes. We want to actively recruit. Yes. How's it working? Next question. It's a challenge. There's no question. And so here's what we're seeing in the industry right now. What methods are you using to recruit? And so internal transitions is the highest rated. So people being on a supervisory committee and then moving over is kind of, that's your bench. Promoted from associates, that concept of moving from bench to the game. Nominating committees, formal searches, mergers, self-nominations, and it gets down to anything under 10% is not necessarily an industry trend there. What we'd like to see more is that formal search and nominating committee doing community outreach to go get folks. In recruiting, we have this saying that we want to be hunters, not gatherers. So when you do a recruiting job and you say, I put an ad out there and I only got 3 resumes, you were gathering. But if you said, here's the top 20 employers in town, here's the community leaders, go hunt. Go find some folks that make sense, that could bring those skill sets to the table, whether it's cyber, technology, facilities, legal, HR, go find them. Be hunters and not gatherers. And then, because you could have the same meeting around the table and spend an hour about how you couldn't find anybody, or you could spend an hour hunting.
Yep.
So
congratulations on your networking responsibilities. That's
yeah. And again, when I do planning meetings, I always talk to boards about, what's your legacy? What do you want your legacy to be? And if you're going to ensure your legacy, one of those things is replace yourself. Actively go out there, and maybe it's not a clone of you. In a lot of cases, it won't be a clone of you because your skill set was perfect for the time. And as we look at new issues, maybe it's not the match that we need, whether it's diversity or experience or a demographic issue. So hunt, not gather.
And that's definitely one of those situations where have been successful if you are capable of, one, finding somebody that's able to replace you.
Yeah, I mean, you joke about it, but I think that's the ultimate test is I'm giving you the keys to the Cadillac, drive it and be successful and get us where we need to go. I gassed it up. It looks shiny and here it is.
Please don't run it into a wall. I believe in you.
Yeah, please don't. Or like, do you ever do that at a valet? You give the person the keys and you go, I think that was the valet.
Yeah.
I hope that was the valet.
Was that a name tag or was that just a random piece of apparel that had a
they really got out here quickly. But that's what you're doing in this environment that's the definition of success leading a legacy. You're spending time and you're going after the folks you think would be best to carry on your legacy. So how long is it taking? Look, 7 out of 10 respondents said it takes more than 6 months. I mean, you can't say elections are in April, so let's start putting ads out and figuring out people. So I'm real happy see that last bar there? Have not had to recruit anybody in the last 5 years. I'm really happy for you.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Your time's coming. Let's just say it's just.
You're going to be in that first bar soon.
During this survey period, it wasn't your issue. Good for you. So I think just like we do in executive recruiting, the capstone to making a good launch and a good success is onboarding. So we asked the question for boards as like, hey, you bring somebody on. In the old days, it was be quiet and listen, and observe, and then you'll need to know all you need to know. And that's, maybe in that era worked, but today there's just way too many things, intangibles that go wrong. So what I thought was interesting, how far the needle moved on some of these just since 2018. The idea that a new person wouldn't actually have a one-on-one meeting with the CEO, doesn't make sense to me. So you see the jump, but 4 out of 10 do that. I mean, 6 out of 10 don't schedule that. And I think that's, first of all, they need to know their boss. And I'm probably what happens is I bet a lot more CEOs reach out as opposed to waiting for that interaction. But that's so important.
What do you think the main driver of this was? What do you think changed other than a pandemic of, epic proportions? But what changed? Why is that such a big jump now?
I think people committed to doing something.
Okay.
We identified it in this issue, and I think boards have responded very well that they needed to look at the first year. Now, I don't have a formal statistic on that, but if you spend, as it says on this chart, 6+ months recruiting somebody, selling them on this position and this opportunity to be a contributor in your community, and in the first 6 months, they don't know what to do. They don't know if they should speak or listen. They don't get to meet folks. Guess what? They could be leaving faster than it took us to get them. So protect your investment from day one.
What about assigning a mentor?
Mentors work. Yeah. And again, I love the idea of that's a great role for an emeritus person. I'm a sucker for back in the day stories. I love it. But the idea is...
Wait, do we need to have an election to replace you here, John? You're in the past.
Okay. Yeah. And hamburgers used to cost $0.25.
I know. All right.
But when we look at it, is that onboarding is the finish line is not that the membership voted them a position and they're on the board. The finish line is 10 years down the road when they've been a contributor. So let's redefine success as, aha, we got one. Now what? Now what's really important? So you look at this list of what people are doing in that first year, and you say, getting them in the education. I mean, literally used to, we say, go to CUNA, they have some materials, or Google what is a credit union. There's formal programs, and our trade associations have done a tremendous job of getting those core things. NCUA's done a decent job of getting us materials on that. Do they need to meet with the chair? Do they need to have some one-on-one? That's probably how people answered the mentor question, having maybe that's a chair's responsibility. And the nothing, let's keep that under 5%. I think that's okay. Now, in this last 2 years, what have people looked at? And so the idea of, you asked the question earlier about where cyber stuff is. Well, what's the number 2 competency sought right now? Technology. And I love the idea that entrepreneurial is coming up, because the idea is that, as we change delivery channels and we have more competitors, being able to say what is going to resonate with the new generation of members. I'd love to see that. How do we put things together in the SEG, related to the industry we are in, so they can relate to the membership. If that doesn't make sense, it's like, if you're a credit union where one of your sole sponsors is hospital or healthcare, and to have somebody from the hospital on your board to explain the rules they do, when they can use it, when can they use the credit union, what's the easiest way to get access to, some of the HR things, that's a huge win. So that's kind of what we mean there. And then the idea, does management take an active role in recruiting? And right now, 6 out of 10 credit unions say that that's an activity that we ask management to do. And I would challenge boards to say, I'd love to see this flipped. I would love to see the proactive nature of the board taking the initiative and the management team supporting that effort, not driving the effort. Because what happens in 3 years when, 5 of the new volunteers were personally recruited by the CEO, the remaining board can say, well, this is a hand-picked group of folks that is going to do whatever the CEO wants. We just don't want that appearance. That doesn't happen all that frequently, but why have even the appearance? Mm-hmm. There's things you can delegate. There's things you can't delegate in any job. And one of the things that we really think of is volunteer directors need to drive this process. Now, with that said, we got through a deck. We had echoes. We had mic problems. We had screen issues.
We knocked all the bugs off. The dust off, I suppose, as well.
We're going to get better at this, guys. It's been a while. So thanks for your patience. I want to give you some heads up on things. November 10th and 11th will be the Hilton Symposium, and it's in the Woodlands, Texas. It's on one of those days is my birthday. I had the best birthday ever last year. So I want everybody invited to my birthday party. The Hilton Symposium. And November 12th is my anniversary. So you're all invited to that party too. But, just put that on your calendar. We've got so much inquiries. Lock in your dates and your commitments. So we have room for everyone, because we're kind of dictated by the space of the hotels. April 28th, if you want to mark that on your calendar, we'll be sending e-blast out on that as well. That'll be part 2 of this presentation. And that's where we'll be talking about the compensation trends that we're seeing in the marketplace today and what people are doing to put those programs together.
Board compensation trends.
Which one?
Board.
Oh, excuse me, board. Yeah. We're going to talk about all the other layers throughout the year. So this is board specific, part 2 of this. Probably May 16th. If you want to mark that down, that's where we're going to start dealing with inflation when it deals with staff comp and exec comp. If you've been with us or been a client or seen our materials, last forecast, we were egging and pushing and cajoling folks not to use 3% merit increases. And Jeff's kind of a Nostradamus, but not me. And so we pushed those numbers, and we've blown through some of those already. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if I'm not an economist, but I think we can all agree that inflation is not transitory at this point. It's really impacting. So we're going to be looking at strategies people are using to kind of show some empathy for staff on how to deal with this a little bit faster than we thought, and just some techniques. So we'll be doing some primary research on that in the next 2 weeks and sharing that with you. That'll be May 16th. So the dates are November 10th, 11th, April 28th for the part 2 of the board survey, and then May 16th where we'll start talking about dealing with the inflation issues that we're seeing in the labor pool.
Perfect. All right, we got a couple minutes for a couple of quick questions here.
We do.
And John, let me bring up this slide deck here. You can go to slide 17, I believe it was. A question about continuing education policy requirement for board members. Can you define the continuing education? Is that VIP, courses, webinars, conferences? What's that include there?
17?
17.
Everybody close your eyes till I get there.
Yeah. 13, 14, 15. One more.
I don't feel like going anywhere.
Come on. There you go.
So the question is, What specific programs?
What is this? What is continuing education when it comes down to board members? What are the requirements? So if we've seen them requiring that, what are they requiring?
So if anyone out there has a professional designation, you have continuing ed requirements to keep your certification or you recertify your results. CPAs have to spend so much time. Wealth managers in the HR field, all of us in this room have to do continuing ed. So what it is you set a bar of how much time you think you need to spend in education to keep up to date with today's issues. So if it's 10 hours or 20 hours and it's defined as you go to the GAC and you sit through, those types of things, you go to a specific, whether it's mortgage issues or consumer lending issues or marketing issues, you sit through those. And I said earlier, I want people to go outside the industry to look at some of the issues that we're dealing with too. So to answer the question, it's putting a number of hours you need to commit to learning and keeping up to date with the industry trends and the consumer financial services market and the local economy.
Okay. And kind of continuing that vein, someone had a question about, so right now in 2021, 29% of respondents said other for what their financial literacy resources were, rather than selecting, we had NCUA, CUNA, and NAFQ. So the predominant response for that other is internal training. So CFO or compliance providing that training to the board, and then followed by state leagues was the other big one. But when we put out the report, we can include that information as well.
Fantastic. Any thoughts on nepotism amongst officials?
Yeah. High-performing boards are transparent, and high-performing boards want diversity and they want well-rounded representation of the community. And sometimes, father passing a seat down to a daughter or a relative to a relative. I understand the practice, but I also think if we do a good job of the hunting and not gathering, we get more diversity on our field. Mm-hmm. Now you go back 20 and 25 years ago, you would see more of those types of handoffs. And I think today we should strive to be as diverse as possible.
Kind of put them in the same process that everybody goes through. And if they're the right person, they're the right person rather than just handing the torch.
We want the best person. Yeah. And the best person at different times is a different competency, depending on, we look at our core skills and where we could beef it up. I use the same concept in executive compensation. I love to have an attestation that says the board is elected by the membership. It's not appointed by the CEO. We're not related. You go down the list and that says, that's whatever the decision is, there's independence there. And that's what we're striving for.
Fantastic. And last but not least, since we've got only 1 minute left, is there any idea on when registration will open for the symposium?
Oh, it's open.
Is it posted onto the website yet?
The official registration form is not, but it's in the works. So probably in the next few weeks.
You are not any fun today.
The answer is soon.
Send me an email. Send it on a paper plane.
I mean, you can always just email me.
We'll make it happen for you one way or the other.
Yeah, no, and we'll put it on our website and send out an e-blast and everything once that page is open so that and you can register as soon as possible.
Fantastic.
Just think, it's not going to happen. The dates are not going to change. So, send an email to Hillary, send an email to me, not to Jeff. Jeff will screw that up.
I'm good at that kind of stuff. So
thank you, Hillary.
All right, guys, we're right at the top of the hour here. Thank you so much for joining us. We do sincerely appreciate it. We will have this webinar posted on the website, as well as you will receive a slide deck. Just give us a couple days to put all those pieces together, and you'll have that information there. John has one. Yes, you in the front.
Yeah, and so, so remember, guys out there, you'll have access to this deck. Please share it with your fellow directors at a meeting. Put it in the board package. Does it prompt discussion when you have your next strategic planning session? We want to prime the pump. So please use it in those veins.
And once we've done part 2,
I didn't call on you.
We've done part 2 of the board survey results in 2 weeks. We'll be publishing the full report that goes in much more detail about all of this information. Yeah. So
fantastic.
Highlights today, you can drill as deep as you want in a couple weeks.
Sounds good. All right, guys, thank you so much.
Thank
It's been
you.
an absolute pleasure to be back in the studio. We will have all the bugs worked out for next round. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye-bye.